Back again. In this, I think it's going to turn out to be a fairly short piece. I'm just going to cover the next part of the three models that we will ultimately be tying together. I'm referring to the model that's in the textbook of net capital outflow as a function of the real interest rate, with the real interest rate being on the vertical axis, contrary to the traditions of math, because it reflects nicely that way in this three-part system of models. So what I'm talking about is the image in the textbook that looks something like this. We have net capital outflow down here. I think I can do a straighter line. Let me see. A little better. I'll just fudge that part right there. And now we have a pretty straight line. And the real interest rate up here. That's the real interest rate. And the net capital outflow is a downward sloping curve. And then there's a zero inserted in the middle of the model. So let me elaborate on what's going on here to help that make sense. So right here is where net capital outflow would be zero. Let's explore what that means, because I know most students at this stage are accustomed to zero being here. And that makes this very wacky. I don't disagree, it's fairly wacky. But we can still work with it. Okay. Since zero is here, what are numbers lower than zero? What could we call numbers lower than zero? I think we would always call these negative numbers. So this is negative net capital outflow left of this measure right here. And so this must be positive over here. Okay, so you're looking at that. I know a lot of people are looking at that going, but ugh, zero is supposed to be here, negative is supposed to be over there. I know. But let's think about the definitions of our terms here that we're applying graphs to, and maybe that'll help. Net capital outflow. Net capital outflow is equal to the purchase of our foreign assets minus foreigners' purchases of U.S. assets. At least U.S. net capital outflow is. Again, I find it easier to think about this right where I am than to try to think about it broadly, at least to start. So U.S. net capital outflow is equal to our purchases of foreign assets minus foreigners' purchases of U.S. assets. It's equal to net exports, which we know is a negative number. So we know our net capital outflow is a negative number. So it's somewhere over here. And what might this mean then? I don't know, something extreme, something off the charts, something we don't care about. So our net capital outflow is somewhere left of this point for the U.S. That's all this really means. That's all this context, the zero tells us in this context, is that somewhere left of that is negative net capital outflow. And that would correspond to higher real interest rates. If we had lower real interest rates, like let's say here is where we are to start. Well, that would land our net capital outflow here. Okay, so before I say that lowered, let's again make sure that's clear what that means. That means foreigners' purchases of U.S. assets are greater than Americans' purchases of foreign assets, because it's a subtraction. Again, net capital outflow is our purchases of foreign assets minus foreigners' purchases of U.S. assets. If foreigners are purchasing more U.S. assets than we're purchasing of foreign assets, that difference, because it's a subtraction, is negative because the second number is bigger. Well, now let's go ahead and think about what might change that, all else held constant. and that's an important consideration, I think, when looking at this model to make it make any sense, is to remember this is all else held constant. Well, that's at high interest rates. They're on the relative high side. Okay? It's rewarding to be investing in the U.S. It's rewarding to be investing in the U.S. because of the high interest rates. Let that sink in. Revisit the definition again. U.S. net capital outflows are purchases of foreign assets minus foreigners' purchases of U.S. assets. And the interest rate is fairly high, so it's rewarding to be purchasing U.S. assets. So do you see, since it's rewarding, do you see why foreigners would be perhaps purchasing more of our assets than we're purchasing of their assets? High interest rate, they're purchasing more of our assets than we're purchasing of their assets because it's rewarding to be purchasing U.S. assets. And net capital outflow is that difference. And maybe I don't want to write that entire statement out because it's a long statement and I don't have good abbreviations for it. So maybe you just want to jot it down as you think about this. Have it in front of you. Print my notes. It's in there in a couple places. Our purchase of foreign assets minus foreigners' purchases of U.S. assets is U.S. net capital outflow. When interest rates are high, it's rewarding to have U.S. assets. So foreigners are purchasing a lot of our assets, and we're not purchasing a lot of foreigners' assets because ours are rewarding. Now, what if interest rates fell? If this falls, let's say to here, well, now we could shift into positive net capital outflow. Why? Because net capital outflow is equal to, I don't know how many times I said this, because it's hard. I'm just trying to make it sink in. It's the only way I can think of to help make sense of this. Net capital outflows are purchases of foreign assets minus foreigners' purchases of U.S. assets. Well, look what happened. If interest rates in the U.S. are lower, it's not as rewarding to have U.S. assets. So think about that balance between that thing I just said. Foreigners are less likely to purchase U.S. assets because it's not as rewarding. And we're less likely to purchase U.S. assets. We're more likely to purchase foreign assets. So again, if it's our purchases of foreign assets minus foreigners' purchases of U.S. assets, the first of those two numbers in that subtraction will be a bigger number at lower interest rates, and the second is likely to be a smaller number. So when you have a big number minus a small number, you have a positive number. And so we're likely to go into positive territory with lower interest rates. And of course, if we had moved that arrow the other way and just gone from here to here, everything would be true in the opposite directions. So when you've read the book, you probably looked at that model, and I think most normal people would have gone, I don't know what's going on there. I see a 0 in the middle of the number line in the Cartesian coordinate plane. Well, set aside what you know about the Cartesian coordinate plane in math for just a minute and let these terms get applied to this model, and it starts to make some more sense. At least I hope it does. So that's this piece. I'm out of whiteboard space anyway, so I'm going to stop recording, clean off my whiteboard, and I will start another recording explaining the next piece of our three-piece model, and then probably I'll stop recording and maybe put all the pieces together. I suspect is what we'll do. That gives you a chance in between these things to rewind or do what you need to do to make it make sense.